I want you to hit me as hard as you can.
Hey everybody, it's Chris Bumbray here again for JoBlo.com. Welcome to another video edition of The Best Movie You Never Saw, and this week we're taking a look at the 1986 Sylvester Stallone vehicle, Cobra. It's Christmas in LA, but the streets aren't safe. An axe-wielding cult of serial killers are prowling around looking to establish a new order. Luckily, Marion Cobretti, aka Cobra, ain't gonna take that shit. And when a witness to a murder, played by Brigitte Nielsen, is able to finger their leader, the cops unleash Cobra to do his thing, and the bodies are gonna start piling up. In addition to Sly, Brigitte Nielsen, who he was married to at the time, co-stars, as does Brian Thompson, who you'll recognize from playing heavies in a whole bunch of movies from this era. The movie was written by Sylvester Stallone, but directed by George P. Cosmatos of Rambo 2. Now, Canon Films. Now, this logo was familiar to anyone who grew up in the 80s, and for a while, Monahan Golan and Jorn Globus flirted with the big time, with Cobra being one of their few co-productions with a major studio, in this case Warner Brothers, where they didn't actually take the lead. This was a big-budget action movie for its time, $25 million in 1986 dollars, and came out hot on the heels of Rocky IV and Rambo's First Blood Part 2, two blockbusters that arguably made Sylvester Stallone the world's biggest action star in 1985. After all, they were the number 2 and number 3 movies of the year, beat only by Back to the Future. Apparently, Stallone had a deal with Canon Films, which is how they ended up co-producing this with Warner Brothers, because the budget was just too big for them and they were trying to move into the mainstream. And in making Cobra, Warner Brothers gave Stallone carte blanche, given his size at the time. This is actually an adaptation of a novel called Fair Game, which later became a 1985 action flick with Cindy Crawford and William Baldwin. And the genesis of the titular character, Cobra, actually comes from Sly's brief flirtation with the lead in Beverly Hills Cop. Not happy with the comedic direction they wanted to go in, Sly bowed out, took his ideas, and made Cobra instead, hiring his Rambo First Blood Part 2 director Cosmatos to give this the same adrenaline charge. Now, somewhere along the line, the studio got nervous, and Cobra, which resembles an old-fashioned 70s giallo policier, Cobra was going to be one of Sly's darker movies, dealing with serial killers that actually had a lot in common with an old 1970s Jean-Paul Belmondo movie called Paul Shirey, Fear Over the City, which dealt with a hard-boiled cop chasing after a serial killer and had action elements in it. However, the studio seemed to get nervous at some point, and the movie, which was originally supposed to run about 2 hours, got cut down to a quick 85-minute action flick. Now, it was actually a sizable hit back in its era, grossing $49 million domestically, but compared to how big Rambo 2 and Rocky IV were, it was considered a bit of a flop. The movie was really overshadowed at the box office by Top Gun, which had opened slightly before, although worldwide this was a pretty huge hit, grossing an extra $100 million. In the years since, Cobra's been mostly forgotten, but it still has some rabid fans, including myself, and also the guy who runs Arrow in the Head, John Fallon, is a huge fan of this movie. Cobra is definitely a cult item, but increasingly, it does feel like a bit of a movie lost to time. A Cobra franchise never really panned out, and nobody really talks about it anymore. Now, I think Cobra's a really fun 80s movie. It's very self-serious, but that I think only adds to the charm. I mean, Stallone's catchphrase in this movie is, "Crime's a disease, I'm the cure." I mean, it is such a Reagan-era film of its time. Imagine Dirty Harry, but for the 80s, meaning jacked up on roids and party and yeah. To me, it ranks as one of Stallone's best movies, and one that too often gets a bad rap. It's ultra stylized, opting for this quick-cut MTV aesthetic that Sly was going for in his own directorial vehicles back then, with Rocky IV being a good example, and the carnage is just unbelievable for a cop movie. I mean, the body count is somewhere in the triple digits, and
You have the right to remain silent.
a lot happens in this flick. A true product of his time, a lot of things some viewers may find corny kind of appeal to me, including the non-stop pop soundtrack complete with a cheesy love interlude theme sung by Bill Medley.
These few stolen moments, you all have to show.
and the insane over-the-top violence. I mean, there's a car chase in the middle of this movie, which is maybe the bloodiest car chase of all time. And of course, Stallone's performance is quite monosyllabic. He wears aviator sunglasses with a matchstick permanently sticking out of his mouth, and of course a Henley. Cobretti is deliberately stylized. Heck, even Sly had some fun with the machismo aspect of the fact, with his leading lady and real-life wife at the time, Brigitte Nielsen, dwarfing him physically. She's like a foot taller than him. And of course, he has his character named Marion, which isn't exactly the most obvious name for a man.
Did you use unnecessary deadly force?
I used everything I had.
Cobra also has these weird gonzo touches, like a whole scene where Nielsen is doing some kind of futuristic fashion show where she's posing with robots and is photographed by David Rashi, who later played Sledgehammer on a show that I loved in the era. And there's a weird scene in the film where Stallone is confronting some kind of street tough and he rips off his undershirt and he reveals that he's wired for sound. I mean, I don't really understand what the whole thing about this was and why it wasn't cut out of the film, but hey. And of course, who could forget how Cobra eats leftover pizza? By cutting off a piece with scissors, taking a bite while cleaning his gun. I mean, this is a very strange film. And Sly did have some affection for the character, telling Ain't It Cool News a couple years ago that I thought Cobra had every chance to be a wonderful character. Oh, I'm not going to do this. I thought Cobra had every chance to be a wonderful character that could have caused some memorable cinematic mayhem. I take the blame because I should have directed it, and the choices made in the last 30 minutes of the movie were pretty banal. I believe the inclusion of a real actress and not a bewigged ex-wife would have certainly been a celebrated change and perhaps would have made the series a lot more dramatic. So, Stallone didn't have exactly kind words to say about ex-wife Brigitte Nielsen's performance in the movie, and sure enough, it is kind of strange, but it kind of works the stylized aspect of the film. He mentioned something about the last half hour, and I think that makes a lot of sense because the first hour of the film is this really kind of dark Christmas noir set in LA, but then they leave LA and it becomes much more of a conventional action movie. It's not as dark, it's not as bloody, there's violence, but violence in kind of an over-the-top 80s blockbuster way, not necessarily in a horror movie way. It seems like somewhere along the line the studio really did get nervous and made them reshoot a whole bunch of the movie and make it more conventional, but the first hour survives as this kind of dark horror action hybrid, which is very unique in Sly's filmography. I really like the gritty atmosphere the first half has. The fact that they set it at Christmas time in LA is very, very strange because you wouldn't expect a movie like this to be set at Christmas, and they really don't make a big deal out of it. You just see some tinsel in the background, you hear some Christmas carols now and then. It's not really a big deal, and I think it's pretty easy for people to not realize that it actually takes place at Christmas, something similar to First Blood, another Rambo movie. Now, the second half, of course, has our heroes leaving the city to draw the baddies out and cut down on collateral damage, which I think is actually a pretty sound idea for an action movie, but of course Sly wasn't too happy with how it turned out. And of course it finds Stallone in one-man army mode, which of course I like because the action scenes towards the end are great and the way he does away with the main baddie with the big meat hook is badass.
This is where the law stops, and I start.
Now, one of the cop movie cliches that I've always really liked is the supermarket shootout. It happened in RoboCop, it happened in Hard to Kill, it was spoofed in Loaded Weapon 1, and one of the best versions of this scene is in Cobra, where Sly walks into a hostage situation like a cowboy with you seeing his license plate saying Awesome 50, stopping for a few sips of cold brew and not even pretending for a second like there's any way the baddie is going to be allowed to walk out in one piece. I mean, it's almost a horror movie where Stallone is like the Freddy Krueger figure, and the bad guy is just absolutely terrified of him. Now, of course, Cobra is widely available on DVD and a nice looking Blu-ray from Warner Brothers. It's also available on streaming on some sites. You can get it on YouTube, you can get it on iTunes. And I think, for me, Cobra is an underrated 80s action classic and one of the definitive Stallone vehicles. Those of you who only know him as Rambo and Rocky should give him a watch as Cobra, and then dig into more of Sly's deep catalog, with a few of them like Tango and Cash, Demolition Man, and Cliffhanger being stone cold classics in my book. Crime's a disease, Sly's the cure. Until next time, I'm Chris Bumbray for JoBlo.com.